slides, whoever's going to quote that word, and then we're trying to figure out.
We were trying to build a system like that for the hand signs. Parliament implemented actually things like that. So that's for maybe it's just very parliamentary service. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou. Right, my name is Kath Danaher and I am going to introduce to you today our speakers for this session. First of all, I'd like to introduce Samuel Mann. Sam is a professor within Capable New Zealand, Otago Polytech's School of Work-Based Learning and Professional Practice. He's on research and study leave this semester, exploring how we integrate complex narratives into learning, research and practice, focusing on socio-ecological transformation and professional practice. And his co-presenter today is Ray O'Brien. Ray works across several areas at Otago Polytech, but at the core of them all, he is a learning designer. He's been part of the team designing and implementing the Bachelor of Leadership for Change and specialises in the integration of sustainable practice into programs across many disciplines. So Ray and Sam say that increasingly we're called upon to deliver education that's transformative, self-determined, and preparing learners for futures in a rapidly changing world. However, often educational constraints lead to tightly prescribed inputs and outputs, with little room for authentic learning or for self-determination. In their presentation, they introduce a wider interpretation of open education through the lens of the Bachelor of Leadership for Change. They show that an open approach is fundamental to this program, from an open-ended graduate profile to open pedagogy, and using and producing open resources. It's expected that this application of open education will dramatically change the face of education. I'd like to hand over to those two presenters now.
Thank you, Kath.
One each. This one's working.
Well, I'm going to go. Thank you. So we're talking about open education. Open, not as in beer, not as in liberty, or kind of as in liberty, but as in mindset. Right, go.
Okay, so this is a real fastball for me because I haven't even seen some of the slides that Sam's put up so far. So we're going to be bouncing back and forwards and being a little bit creative here. Open to certainly when we talk about what we've been doing on Bachelors of Leadership for Change is beyond the openness of the resources. It's open to all sorts of change, open to new ideas, open to complete transformation of education. Yeah, it's the thinking big, it's the thinking outside of the box, it's the question of whether there is actually a box.
So the plan is that I'm going to go really fast through all this. I'm not going to apologise for that. The idea is that it's a wash over the things that we've been doing so that we can get to the end, so we can really ask that question that Ray's just asked. I think he asked the question about that, what does it mean to go beyond the resources to be really thinking about openness and the mindset. On the sides here, we've got it says flexibility to be self-determined, and you can think of that as openness. And we're going to talk about the development of the Bachelor of Leadership for Change. What we do in Capable New Zealand is follow our pedagogical approach, which has got the values that you can see here, stolen from the Agile Manifesto. You can see that it's processes of learning over a focus on content, facilitators as co-learners, and so on and so on. So that's the premise by which we start from. And so you might say, okay, what does that look like? Let's put that into practice. So what we do at the undergrad, I'm going really fast through this. This is our independent learning pathway. We take the graduate profile approach. We get people to write their autobiography. We lift that up into an autoethnography. We match that with the graduate profile. We deal to any bits that are sticking out, but we're not a deficit model. What we're trying to do is to focus on the areas which they want to develop, Quite often it's at this middle level, the analysis level. They know how to do something but not why or what the alternatives are, or it could be out on the sides. This is all about them defining who they are, defining their professional framework of practice, and they stand up at the end and they say, this is my professional framework of practice. I am a network engineer, give me the Bachelor of Information Technology. Or I am a leader in sports management, give me the Bachelor of Applied Management. And we do about 400 of those a year.
So if you think about openness as a mindset in this context, there is a tension that if you can prescribe a textbook, whether it be open source or not, are you actually open enough to the learner determining what should be learned? If you are prescribing courses that are directed towards a specific profession, are you open to the fact that those professions might not exist by the time the graduate comes out? Are you open to the idea that it's actually down to the learner to define their own space in the world?
So at our graduate level, so we've got about 120 people doing the Masters of Professional Practice and 35, I think, doing the Doctorate of Professional Practice. We take a very similar approach where it's based around that framework of practice. Our end goal is that professional framework of practice. In terms of the thesis, the defensible argument, that is what they are defending. I am a thought leader in values-driven software engineering, or whatever it might be. And so our whole pathway is about how to get people there. So it starts again with that autobiography, that autoethnography. That's about saying who I am, looking backwards to look forwards notion. It gets to a learning agreement in which people are saying, this is what I want to be. I want to be this. And we go through a process of saying, okay, there's a thing up there, you might not have noticed it popped up, of saying, okay, so that's where you're aiming. Let's look at, there's a framework canvas for that. What does it look like now? Stemming from that, we can identify the learning outcomes. So these learning outcomes are determined by the learner. All we need to do is to check that they match up with the master's or the doctorate level. And then we develop a work-based learning project, which is a vehicle to accomplish that learning. And this is also ethnographic action research, if you want to put fancy words around it.
So, if you think about that in the context of openness, a lot of the time we talk about openness in terms of being open with our content. Yeah? But there we're actually looking at open in terms of the structures. We're laying out the structures and letting someone else shape, share, and alter, remix, mash up the structures in there. So that's another step in openness.
And people do a whole range of things. The people walk in the door and they've got this thing that they want to do. They want to become this weirdo thing, and they want to do it doing this weirdo thing at work. And it's the role of the mentor is to try and help them achieve that. So this is what we do in practice. That's our implementation of that. And then we started looking at what are the challenges for the future. We were hearing so much about degree requirement. Pricewaterhouse doesn't want accountants anymore, or not, at least not accountants with degrees. These are the new rules from Future Navigator. Things are changing in these ways. And Paul LeBlanc from, where's he from? Southern New Hampshire, talking about moving from the time being the thing, how much time you spend in this degree, how much time you spend in the class being the fixed thing, to learning being the unit of measure. And then we started looking at who have we taught. This is Rimu, who graduated from the BIT a few years ago. He didn't need a BIT, he needed a Bachelor of Rimu. And we started looking at the people around us, and we started realising that it wasn't just the people around us. We could start to identify a whole pile of people who had quite different ideas of what education might look like.
And it's not looking at personas here now, yeah, and starting to use them for design. So when we start looking at personas and the people who we're designing for, no matter how open you think you have been to letting them determine things, no matter how open you think you are to their ideas, they're going to break those boundaries and they're going to keep pushing. And that was one of the real light bulb moments for me. It's like, we thought we've done something fantastically open and open-ended, and actually it wasn't at all. It was quite well within our little box of what we thought education should be, and they broke out of that box for us.
So this is the spot that we tried to fit in. So here is a traditional talk program. This is a very closed model of it's well structured in terms of you can get away with that when you know you're trying to fit people into a box. But when it starts to get that they are defining what the box is, or what the thing is that they're going to get to, that falls apart, and so these models work. So our opportunity that we had was to sit in the middle between those and to pull through all of these bits and pieces together into our new program. So we very much based it around, that framework of practice, and what we did is we went out to a whole pile of practitioners and said, well, what's your framework of practice? And we asked 360 people responded with the sorts of things that they do. So we very much used those, we turned those into our personas, and we used those personas as crash test dummies. Let's skip through here. So we came up with a whole pile of personas, and what we asked our co-designers is, do you know these people? Would a degree like this suit them? What are these people going to do if they get a free hand with their careers?
So again, openness in the context of that consultation, 3 rounds of consultation, 300 change makers from around the world. It wasn't actually about us saying this is what should be in the programme, it was us facilitating a design process and being open to them defining it from outside of education.
So we asked why these people would like it, we also asked why these people wouldn't like it, and because that gave us the constraints which we had to design something to fix. We also found some more personas at that point. We were quite open to having those new personas. And at this point what we did is we said, okay, with these personas, what are these people going to do? What are these people going to do if they get a free hand? What are they going to be achieving? And so people filled in the first job and the dream role. And then what we did is we gave people we've got a graduate profile that you could drive a bus through. So the idea is that it's essentially a self-defined graduate profile. And so we said, okay, here is this first go at our self-defined graduate profile. Those of you that recognise Jeff Scott's work will recognise we stole it from him. And use that, would that enable, would you like me to go back a slide? We use that to enable, would it work, and so on. And we went through. We then got to our draft, I'll skip past that, we got through our initial structure, and we said, would this work for that, would it work for these people? So they were very much crash testing our degree way before anybody turned up. We eventually got that graduate profile. So here is our structure. Very much based, as it popped up just then, very much based on the framework of, professional framework of practice. But we call that the exit strategy. So it's entirely based around what is it that the person is going to walk away with at the end. And it's their professional framework of practice, it's their evidence portfolio, it's who they're connected to, and it's their plan for Monday. What we want them to be able to, because we're doing this degree for jobs that haven't been invented yet, if that's the only thing we sold it to, no one would come and do our degree because their parents wouldn't let them. So we had to make sure that plan for Monday is built in throughout the whole thing. Not just in a mercenary kind of way, but also as a way of structuring what is it people want to achieve.
And in terms of being open to the shape of that exit strategy, we would never have come up with the idea of designing a degree for advocates in transgender parenting. We probably wouldn't have come up with a degree for interprofessional practice management and Maori women's refugees. We probably wouldn't have come up with a degree around collaborative working in compost management. Yeah. So that's when openness as a mindset starts producing a completely different outcome in education.
So very quickly, here's our structure. It is a 3-year degree, at least on paper. It's got the framework, the sort of E-shaped things that are the framework of helping people to get there, and then the bits in the middle are entirely project-based. The whole thing is project-based. The first one, which is now called
Me and my emerging.
capabilities.
Thank you. It's about them, identifying who they are. This is about making sure that they know where they want to go, making sure that they get a whole range of experiences and where they think they're going to go, because you don't want to find out after you graduate that actually I don't want to do this. And then this is about achieving the particular skills. This is a practice project, and then this is a year-long project actually doing that thing. So it's structured. I want to make a difference. I know where I'm going. I'm developing my capabilities, and I am whatever it is.
Advanced standing? Talk about advanced standing here.
We'll just quickly do this and we'll go to advanced standing. So it's co-design, it's ARCO-based, so it's very much we're learning alongside and so on. It's heutagogy and it's entirely self-determined. In terms of the structure, it's a one-on-one mentoring session, there's a group planning session, and there's an inspiration session, and there's some self-formed groups that the learners have created. We have a rolling cohort, people you can roll this afternoon if you like. It's entirely collaborative based, and we work on the basis of radical inclusion and respect. Those two things together have actually proved quite interesting on how those two things match together, but that's a different story. And I'll skip through these ones. And now we've got, so then we get this thing to actually delivering this thing, getting it approved, and then these real people turned up. So we were working on the basis of these. It's a good picture of Ray. These personas became real, and that's where we had to get even. We thought we designed the most open thing we could possibly think of, and then this lot turned up, and we had to make it more open. Are you going to talk about advanced standing?
Yeah. So again, being open to different ways of knowing. The fact that most degrees assume everyone comes in at the same stage, progresses through at the same rate, and gets to the same stage at the end. I guess we challenge it a little bit in that we have got entry points at the start of first year, at the start of second year, and at the start of third year, based on other things that we do at Capable New Zealand, recognising experience in the workplace and the capabilities that they bring. So again, joining a community of learners rather than a class and a cohort moving through together, but joining in at different stages along that process based on us accepting and being open to the knowledge and understanding you bring.
Our personas that we were working on did turn up.
So the line that you're looking at there was that line of self-determination, and the ups and downs and our idealistic thought of what it was going to be as open at the start, which got broken, and all of a sudden we had all this other wide sort of perspective that we could get in. We had a phase where we had getting some guidance and narrowing it down a little bit, so perhaps the box closing in for a while. We definitely had the stage where we had to get it through NZQA, which reduced our openness a little bit. And again, when we actually got that approval, we went, oh, now we've got to actually do that. And designing and building things that were still going to respect that openness to the learners' knowledge and what they wanted to do and their aspirations, but still complied with the system that we dwell within. And we've kind of come across a lot of those hurdles, and at the moment we're back in a stage of being able to start being a bit more open again as we evolve into the next step.
And so we started teaching 2 years ago. We've got 5 or 6 yet?
7 graduates now.
7 graduates, and they're coming through, as Ray said before, with things that we would never have thought of. We thought we were being pretty wacko with the things that we were putting up as our potentials, and they're left afield than that. It could be that that's because the first group of people that we've got involved tend to be sort of the social justice things. We think, and they're starting to come through, people that are perhaps a bit more conservative in terms of their aspirations, as people who are certainly conservative in terms of their some of their beliefs. But it'll possibly come back a bit in terms of the standardness of that. I can't remember why that's there, so let's get rid of it. And they're doing a whole range of things.
So this was, Sam did these cartoons to see if I could work out which graduates he was talking about. So we had a college chaplain from a Pacifica background who set up a program and did tours around a range of schools for teen well-being from a faith-based perspective. We have, whenever there's some Extinction Rebellion action happening, we've got a really quiet classroom.
Someone's making a movie about that.
Yeah, so that was someone making a movie following some of the organisers of the climate marches, the climate strikes, and following them over a period of months. Oh yeah, we had one who wanted to make a change to well-being through stand-up comedy. We also had someone who works in a legal firm, and their mission is to try and make legal services more equitably available through the way the prices are bundled. So there's quite a diverse range. We've also got, where's my tech startup one? There's a tech startup in there somewhere, where someone's looking at creating an EdTech platform that will give kids opportunities at school that he never had and was disadvantaged by. So openness to what the future might hold and what the outcomes might be.
And that's us.
I wondered if I could just have a question there, Sam.
You can indeed.
Do you find that you have anybody coming through that actually just wants to make a personal change for them rather than work towards something employment-wise?
That's definitely something we've come up against. We've made a really clear statement that we want to see people who are capable and actively making change. So we've made the stand that this is not a personal development coaching program. It includes that, but it must also have the getting shit done for. No, it's not necessarily reaching their end goal. We just need to be able to see that they're capable of putting it into action.
So my question was, you're obviously dealing with a lot of people who have that end vision already and are really clear about you're not. So that was mine. For some of us, we're kind of like, I think I could do that, and I'm keen on, but I'm not exactly certain where I want to be at the end of it. So how do you work with those people?
So that first year where they're doing me and my emerging capabilities is a big part of that is a review of learning. Who am I? Where am I from? What are my values? What motivates me? And with the whole range from people being able to specify exactly the project they want to do in the third year, through to others who say, and this is almost a quote, I know it's something to do with youth and making their voice better heard, but I've got no idea what I'm going to do. And then with that in mind, you start looking at the next stage, which was a curated experience, and how can we expose them to enough range of experience to help them work out and triangulate down to what they want to do.
The thing that defined the personas that we were working with in the design was variations on that, I don't know what I'm trying to do, was a big part of the different people
I
that
think
we had.
particularly for older learners who would come through those other more traditional educational pathways and all of a sudden being let loose.
One of the questions the degree monitor asked us was, which of those personas have you actually seen in your classroom? And there was only one that we couldn't identify, and that was can't remember his
Discontented one.
or
someone that was
who didn't really know where they were going. They were a bit lost, and we couldn't see anybody in the class who really fitted that description that we set up. But we could see people who, if we'd spoke to them a couple of years prior to joining the course, would probably fitted quite well.
our criteria for entry isn't that they have nowhere they were trying to go. Our criteria for entry is the ability to do that. It's the ability to be sort of self-directed, self-determined. Because as you can see, this is a long way past self-directed being, I need you to learn this thing, but you're allowed to choose how you're going to do it or how you demonstrate this. they're choosing the end goal as well. So we have to work with people who are going to be able to do that.
There's still a number of us that want to be taken on an established journey and a clear pathway and all that.
Yeah. So this is very much a hybrid between the capable approach, where the independent learning pathway, which is for people with that experience and they're able to use their work-based experience to do that, and a talk program where we're able to box it up and progress through a staged, planned journey, because we know where we're trying to get them. And so it is a bit of a hybrid between those two. It's written for school leavers, but in practice, most of the people we've got are early 20s.
We're seeing some more school leavers sign up for next year. Yeah. But again, it's a really clear message. This isn't for every school leaver, but every careers advisor can think of that one person who's active in the environment group, active in the sustainability.
The music's starting.
Well, I'd just like to thank Sam and Ray very much for their presentation, and if you have any further questions, obviously you'll be able to catch up with them afterwards at your leisure and have good conversations about this. So thank you very much.
Not that.
I can try.
You might just give a minute because we're still
That's still right. It's quite
That's really nice. Yeah. That's what I'm going to apologise for last
Kia ora koutou. I'm Kath Danaher, as I said before, and I'm just here to introduce our next speaker. Can you hear me now? No, it's not working. I'll just speak. I'm just here to introduce our next speaker, who is Chris Cormack. Chris Cormack, who is Kaitahu Waitaha Kati Mamoi, is technical leader COEP team at Catalyst IT in Wellington. He has a BSc in computer science and a BA in mathematics and Māori studies. He was the lead developer of the original version of COEP, which is an open source, fully featured, scalable library management system. And he believes in free software and allowing users the freedom to innovate. So as you can see, his presentation today is about Māori data sovereignty and open source. And he's going to start with introducing Indigenous data sovereignty, with particular reference to Māori data sovereignty and the work that Te Mana Rauranga are doing. It will then go on to discuss how, by using open source tools, we can exercise this sovereignty.
Kia ora koutou, e te tuatai ngā mihi kia koe. mō tōku mihi, mō tō mihi, i te ato. Kia ora e te whanauka, kaore e tūtaki ai māua i mua ake, e nai ni ka tūtaki aha. Ko auraki te mauka, ko waiau te awa, ko kaitahu rātou, ko kaitima moi, ko waitaha, ko kuiui, no moiraki ahau. Engari i whanau i Kaukua, i tipu mai au i Whanganui, e noho ana au i te Whanganui atara. I'll flick it to English now. Otherwise, I did a horrible thing in France one time when I was presenting, and I didn't warn the interpreter that I was going to start in Te Reo, and I could see them panicking, so I just went a bit longer. So that kind of gives you background insight into the way I roll. I did apologise to her profusely. So yeah, this is who I am. From down here, I've never lived here, so but my whānau from Moiraki, from all the way back, and 47 generations. And I did, as the introduction said, I worked on koha. I work at Catalyst IT, a couple of my colleagues in the room as well, and a former colleague. I was on the Creative Commons Aotearoa board, and I was on the National Digital Forum board. I've had enough of boards, so I'm not on any boards anymore. You can find me on Twitter. I apologise in advance. No, I'm more snarky on Twitter than I am in real life. I think that goes for a lot of people. So, a disclaimer to start with, I'm not speaking for Te Manararonga. I'm not speaking for Kaitahu. I once got interviewed by RTN News and they put Chris Cormack Kaitahu, and I'm like, I can't speak for the entire 58,000 of us. So I'm not even speaking for my whānau, just me. So we share a similar kaupapa, so I'm going to be talking about, I come much more from the technical side. Most of the people in Te Manararonga, which is the Māori Data Sovereignty Network, are from a policy or educational background. I'm more of a technology practitioner, so I'm kind of like, well, you can do all these policies, but if you stick it in Google Docs, it doesn't matter. So that's where I'm. So my agenda isn't quite nothing. So I'm going to talk about what data sovereignty is really fast. I'm going to talk about Te Manararonga, and talk a bit about open source, and try to tie it all together. And then there's a question that I've reframed. When I gave this talk at the University of Canterbury Research Futures Summit a while back, it was someone asked in the first day, how do you fit a kaupapa Māori view with a data science view? And so they said, Chris will talk about that tomorrow. So I had to rewrite my talk. And so I've left that kind of question in here as well, because it's an interesting one. It's not quite under the topic, but if we have time, we'll get to that as well. So, yeah, narrow definition, you can read that for yourself. But it's the data sovereignty is when your data, where it resides has a big impact, and that's where I kind of look at it as well. So it's kind of like who controls what, how the data is used, who accesses it. So my context is I'm talking, because that's the area I'm focused on, is ability to control where it's stored, how it's used, and who it's used by, and who gets to decide all of those things. So Te Manararonga started Maui Hudson and Professor Tahu Kukatai and Kirikowhai Makairi and a few others. My sister Donna Cormack, who's a medical health researcher, works for Otago University and Auckland University as well, worked on this. And a lot of them came from anthropology, sociology and medical background, and they already had reasonably strong ethic kind of frameworks that they used when they were doing the research. But they realised that none of these frameworks really looked at Māori data as being a thing. They just had this idea that all data was data, and it's points of information, and it's not people, and it's not things, it's just some abstract thing, so you don't really have to treat it with any kind of ethical consideration as long as it's anonymised, which we'll get to, that you can't really do so much. So they were formed in to try and shift the thinking around how Māori data is used. So yeah, we're going for about 4 or 5 years now, and they've one of the first in the world. There's a few more now in Canada and Australia and a few other places that are trying to do the same kind of work around Indigenous sovereignty stuff. Indigenous data sovereignty. Well, general Indigenous sovereignty would be good. But yeah, those are kind of their 6 key goals. By Māori, for Māori is kind of sum it up. So they have a really good, these slides are all online, but the link to the full PDF, they have a really good 6 principles of Māori data sovereignty. So rangatiratanga, whakapapa, whanaungatanga, kotahitanga, manaakitanga and kaitiakitanga. I'm mostly going to be talking around this rangatiratanga one, the authority, that's more about the controlling the use of the data and where it's stored and those kind of things. But later on I'll talk quite a bit about a little bit about the whakapapa part as well, which is one of the things that makes a kaupapa Māori approach to anything to do with data, or anything, a really good way, because we're always thinking about the relationships of things to other things. So points of data aren't points of data. Points of data make up parts of things, and they have a whakapapa, they have a lineage, and they came from somewhere and they're going somewhere, and you can't think of them in isolation in the same way. Whanaungatanga will play in really interestingly in the next few days. Te Whare Hauora is probably going to release there's a, I don't know if you know, but the Kāinga Order, the Housing New Zealand, are doing an RFP around monitoring houses, and they're doing things like carbon dioxide labels and a few other things around that, which it's all really kind of nasty stuff. It's quite nasty RFP. It's the government asserts all sovereignty over the data that's collected and stuff like that. So that whanaungatanga piece is not being factored into any of that at all. Like, none of this data exists without the people who are living in the houses to create it, so surely there's some obligation to them being able to access their own data, or at least have some say in how it's used. The carbon dioxide thing's a really nasty one, because with the carbon dioxide said, so you can measure the number of people in the house, then you can evict people from Housing New Zealand if they've gone over their numbers, or cut their benefit if it looks like they have a partner that they haven't declared. All those nasty things that we know the government does already, this is giving them more tools as well. So that's a really anti-Māori data sovereignty project. If you have a chance, if you have any influence with Housing New Zealand, I'd implore you to exercise some of it. So yeah, as I said, the rangatiratanga bit is what I'm going to focus on. So it breaks down into 3 subsections: the control, the jurisdiction, and the self-determination. So this photo here is one I took on the hikoi for the seabed and foreshore. Sadly, I could have taken the same photo again on the Oranga Tamariki one, this there, and the Ihu Mātau one, and it's sad that that's 2004 and we're still doing the same things, but there we go. So the control is the control and jurisdiction and self-determination are kind of what I see that open source allows Māori organisations and Māori to do. So that's where I'm going to touch a bit more on. I'm going to assume that most people kind of know what open source is, but I'll just those are the 4 freedoms of the software. I'm using open source. I could be using free software. I mean free software. I'm using the term open source because it's kind of become the common parlance, but I really mean free software. Open source often focuses on the total cost of ownership, and that as being a good end goal, and even the development models, where free software is more about the freedoms. And so that's where I'm kind of more interested in, is what it allows you to do. If it saves you money along the way, that's great, but what it allows you to do is what I'm more interested in. So yeah, freedom to read the code, to share the software that you make and the code, to innovate by modifying. So it's very similar to what we heard in the first keynote. It's the same kind of idea around open, like a lot of the open education and a lot of the open content, open data, have the roots in the free software movement. They use the same kind of words and the same thing. So this is around the software, and the freedom to contribute is the last one here. And so why I think that's important, full communism. is that without you controlling the means of the data's production, the means of its use, you can't actually assert any sovereignty over it. And if you're relying on proprietary software, you don't have sovereignty over your data. That's basically what it boils down to. Because at any time they can turn it off and it's gone. There are people who work at the National Library whose job is trying to undo, to read, what's it called? When you look backwards to do something, to try and, yeah. So you've got file formats that no one can read anymore because they were written for some piece of software that no longer exists here. And so the whole thing is trying to unlock this information that's been locked in this proprietary format, and you've lost it. So I didn't know why. I think those are whiskey barrels, or wine. It's a lot of whiskey if it's whiskey. I couldn't think of a better production photo, and I like it. So yeah, the kind of the way I see that plays into with Māori data sovereignty is that there's a lot of, another talk I sometimes give is kind of the similarities between a functioning free software project and marae-based consensus building. And there's a lot of things that you do in terms of building consensus in Hui that work really well in guiding a free software project. And so I think there's a kind of a natural similarity between some of the ideals that come through in tikanga and not so much more tikanga and kaupapa-based practices that lead itself to free software and open source as well. One of the really interesting and scary things, and one of the things that we talk about a lot at Te Manadoranga, is that all iwi usually have some kind of register, so they can have, or if they have a runanga, they'll have some, or a trust, they'll have some kind of register where they can store things like whakapapa, hugely important, really personal information, and most of that is being stored in overseas clouds or in other products as well, and that's kind of, for me, that's quite scary, because you can do all you want. I mean, the utility doesn't apply outside of New Zealand. Arguably, it doesn't apply. No, it hasn't been applied within, but outside certainly not. So you can't be holding up, you can't say, Google, why are you giving my whakapapa to so-and-so? Because they'll be like, well, you put it in our data store and it said on line 3 that we could. So that's one of the things we talk about around. So that's the jurisdiction kind of thing. So that's what I work a lot in Te Manadoranga about, is bringing it kind of back to that. Well, if we have all these policies, we get agreements with government, we take the social license, rip it up and build a proper one that actually respects the partnership that we should have. How is that worth doing if then we're going to ship all our data overseas or lock it up into DocX or whatever we want to do that way? So yeah, the way I see it is that we can't just be, you're not open unless you're open all the way down, is kind of one way of saying it. So if you've got open resources built on proprietary stuff, you're still only sort of open. So this was the question that I got asked there as well, so kind of relating that back in is, so as we mentioned, and as one of the, was it Una said in her question, is moving learners are in a digital space, how do we move the educators into the digital space? So the whole world's moving into this data, this digital driven thing. You have people who talk about, what's it, knowledge based or database. I can't remember what that government called. It was one of Bill English's thing where they got that like big data and you decide things because you've got the data. Of course, there's a whole other talk around algorithms and AI and embedded racism and those kind of things around those decision stuff. But that's kind of the way the world's going, is towards this idea that data drives your decision making. I mean, on the face of it, it's quite a good idea. There's lots of gnarly bits in there. But so the question I was asked was, how do we kind of, to kaupapa Māori one with that, also to change it into an audience for this, when we're building our open education resources, or when we're building our amazing degrees, like we heard in the talk before, it's mean following someone with slides like that. You should give more warnings, like do some drawings or something. But it's, So how do we do that? How do we bring a kaupapa? Well, not full, yeah. Ideally a kaupapa Māori approach, but as close to that as we can get. So how are we including the two treaty partners? So one of the things that, this is my sister told us, it's like, kaupapa Māori is always mindful of context, what I remembered before. So, thank you. Context is the important thing. So not seeing individuals as isolated individuals either, seeing your learners as whānau members, hapu members, iwi members, brothers, sisters, uncles, whatever, seeing them that way as well. And we must, if we're talking in terms of data, we could talk about this in terms of the resources too. We must understand the whakapapa of that resource, which the provenance, who started, how it was created, kind of the idea of CC BY, the attribution, but a longer trail. That kind of where it came from. In Māori, it's really important to give credit to the people. You give credit to the people who came before you. Like, really rare would you talk about yourself, but you talk about the people who enabled what you did. So that's the same kind of thing with. We mustn't take. Yeah, the end of the history is really important. I think that's something we don't do particularly well in New Zealand. We assume that now is now and nothing has gone before and we're all starting. Well, that's what this course doesn't do. We're not all starting at the same point. People have 170 years of colonisation trauma and some people don't. So they're not all at the same level. And so if we do this and we swap out data science for open education resources, but if we do these kind of things, I think we will make it better. This is my document, right? How do you find power-based analysis as a picture? You don't, you just put one of them right. So the kind of things I think about is when we're thinking about the things is, if we're thinking about this is kind of more into open data now, so if we're thinking about what should be open, you look at it in that kind of power differential. The ones with the power should be the most open. The ones with the least power should be the ones deciding what they hold close. And something well worth reading is the Good Data Manifesto. The link's there at the bottom. So it's more again, and this could be in terms of education stuff, is like, what data are we collecting? Do we need to collect it in terms of kāinga order? Do they need to collect carbon dioxide? No. They want to collect humidity and moisture, because that's what makes people sick. So why are we collecting this data and those kind of things? And that's it. So, sorry, I just kind of raced through it and it was kind of two talks sandwiched together because I wanted to try and get as much into it. So hopefully something was useful. Any questions?
Anybody got any questions?
It's not really a question, but I'm sure it's really cool. Thinking about the comment about making data science better, just kind of wanted to amplify that a little bit about the work that Māori scholars and practitioners like yourself do to make all of our practice better. Like as a Pākehā New Zealander, so much of the kind of critical, ethical thinking that happens that stretches the practice that we do. Thinking about, like I work in the library world, and open in a kind of simple Western Enlightenment sense of the freedom to access anything, anytime is one of the goals of openness within the library world. But the challenges that tangata whenua and other Indigenous people put around what Indigenous data and who controls it, who owns it, and how has colonisation affected that control is really powerful in the way that it affects not just that data that should be owned by tangata whenua, but all of the data practices and everything. So I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that money and that point about making all of our practice better, and that what is good for Māori is good for everyone. Yeah, kia ora.
about what Kentaro Toyama said in the Geek Heresy, that technology just doesn't solve things, it just amplifies human drivers or something. And that led me, and prompted by the question there though, is there a decolonised data science?
Yeah.
But is that, do we need to wait until we've decolonised and then do the data science, or how do you see those sitting together?
That's a really good question. So there isn't a decolonised data science at the moment. I feel this is, I was doing a fertility and tech workshop, and I said that we're on step 1 of 627 in terms of respecting the fertility in tech. We're still on step 1 of 627. We're right at the start of that journey, and that applies to data science and sciences in general. Where there are organisations that are doing it better than others. There are some programs out of Canterbury, I don't know down here, sorry, but out of Canterbury there are some that are doing better work in terms of involving the people that they're studying and involving the tangata whenua and the mana whenua of the land that they're studying and stuff as well. But we're early on. I don't know that we can afford to wait. I think kind of what we have to do is try and do the best we can now, because it's going to happen without us if we don't do it. So we just try and have to get in there and try and move it as much as we can. It's kind of that's the way I look at parliamentary politics. It doesn't work for a population that is a minority, but we have to be involved in getting in there, and harm minimisation is kind of how I look at, that's how I vote, and that's how I work in technology and stuff as well. It's kind of like, you're just reducing the harm rather than, I think that's the point we're at in a lot of those data science kind of fields as well. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
I'm aware you work for Catalyst,
Yeah.
and Catalyst host our Moodle servers, which is great because you guys are awesome. We've obviously got all of our student data stored on those Moodle servers, but recently we started thinking about Turnitin, which is the anti-plagiarism software that we use, which is proprietary software, and if you read the details of their license agreement, it's quite scary, and they sort of want to own everything that's ever submitted to them, that sort of thing. I think at the moment it's unavoidable because I don't think we've got an alternative, but is that something that you guys are looking at?
I don't think so. Are we, Paul? Not yet. Paul is the head of open market.
I'm Paul. We worked with another company out of Scandinavia called Ercons, which are coming up with another product that is hopefully going to be better than Turnitin. And we are looking at ways that we can use Moodle's machine learning interfaces and so on. So the institutions themselves have a bit more control over what happens around the plagiarism.
More choice, hopefully.
Yes,
Yeah.
but there is a lot before you could say, hand on heart say, yes, this is competitive.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, one more. Yeah.
It just struck me listening to that, Chris, how obviously vital these principles are in terms of moving forward or developing a future of how we do data science. And New Zealand government, there needs to be more of an awareness and acknowledgement of these principles and incorporation into data science strategy. How do you get them to listen? How do you get these messages out there? Because it seems like, I respond to a lot of RFPs and there's very little acknowledgement or consideration of these things. It's just, here's what we need, and there's no consideration of the users or the data people, the heritage, the lineage.
Yeah. So Twitter me would say just stop giving them our data and do it ourselves. But more realistically, it's more that we have to work on it, multiple avenues. So one of the main things we need to do is build capacity within Māoridom and within New Zealand itself in terms of data scientists and technologists and those kind of people who work in this area. But we also need to, if we have any allies in government, we need to lean on them. We need to make allies in government. We need to work all the angles we can. So you need to do a ground up and a top down and a sideways and a diagonals and any angle you can find, because a lot of what's happening now, my friend Amber often says we're being recolonised with data, and it's really quite true. And so it's a pressing, urgent thing, and so we just need to take any opportunity we can. So my challenge to you as colleagues of mine is when we respond to those RFPs, we should ask those questions. Maybe, there's always a question phase. It's like, what do you think? Where's your thinking about Māori data sovereignty in this document? It may not help us win RFPs, so that's commercial thing against, but I think it's something that if we're committed to these principles, we need to ask those questions, make them think about it. And the more people we do that, then they might start putting those principles in there.
Chris, you've raised some really important questions in this presentation, and it's been interesting, and I think that this is a great forum to start some conversations about this. So thank you very much for your presentation. We've got OERU's delivery model for changing times and open source NGDLE in here next, and then we've got the other one. And the other one next, which is, I think, just not quite finished. Kia ora koutou. I'd like to introduce today Dave Lane and Claire Good for their presentation, which you should see here. Dave Lane is the open source technologist for the OER Foundation, and he got this, which is his dream role, after stints as a research scientist, a role which brought him to New Zealand from the US in the mid-90s, and running his own software development firm, which was acquired in 2012. Dave is a champion of open, having built his career on free and open source software principles. And Claire Good is a member of Otago Polytech's Learning and Teaching Development team. Her career has spanned 22 years in a variety of education contexts in New Zealand, France and the UK. As part of her role at Otago Poly, she's seconded to work on projects with the OERU and has been enjoying developing the network's micro-courses, learning more about open principles and being part of the wider OERU network. So their presentation today, they're talking about the OER Foundation, which is part of the OERU, open as Wayne talked about earlier, part of the Open Education Resources Universitas, an international consortium of 30 publicly funded institutions and organisations. So the OERU adheres to open principles and has pioneered a next generation digital learning environment, NGDLE, to reach learners wherever they are in the world. It's a distributed, loosely coupled component model consisting entirely of free and open source software. So Claire and Dave will describe the technology infrastructure, including their costs, and explain some of the NGDLE's advantages while noting its challenges. They review pedagogical opportunities it presents and the solutions they've implemented in response. Thank you.
So I understand we've lost our microphone. I hope it's working? Oh, great. Okay. So, thank you, Kath, for that introduction. So, as we've already heard this morning, both from Wayne and just now from Kath, the OERU network is made up of more than 30 institutions in 7 global regions. And we currently offer first-year post-secondary courses assembled from OER as micro-courses with pathways to gain academic credit for university qualifications. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the timer going. Adhering to open principles with the emphasis on the 5 R's of reuse. Now, if you're not aware of those, so it's reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, and retain. The OERU has created an open source next generation digital learning environment, or NGDLE, to meet the needs of our learners, of our partners, and of OERU collaborators. And all OERU services are both hosted and delivered via this fully open source infrastructure. This approach has significant advantages, including substantially reduced costs for institutions, as Dave will show us later. The OERU, we've said, is a radically open organisation. By this we mean that we ensure all our materials and processes are available to anyone with access to a computer or mobile device and the internet. Meeting notes, agendas, minutes, strategic plans, learning materials, source code, etc. are all openly available under a free cultural works license. In other words, CC BY or CC BY share alike. Meetings are also, wherever possible, live streamed for any interested parties to view and participate, and recordings are openly published for posterity. We also only employ open source software wherever possible in all of our operations. Being open in these ways is explicit in the OERU's terms of reference, and it's a case of walking the talk. So if we just go back a step, we know that the vast majority of institutions use a learning management system, but the learning management system is typically course and institution focused rather than placing the learner at the centre of their learning experience. So in 2014, EDUCAURS ran a series of focus groups investigating digital learning environments and how they could better support learning and teaching. This research resulted in an April 2015 white paper on NGDLE, calling for them to be digital ecosystems which would promote active learning, provide more personalisation, support diversity, all while retaining the necessary technological coherence. So at the OERU we've determined that one way of supporting learners to develop digital and associated learning literacies is to employ precisely the technologies they need to build digital fluencies for learning today. And this contrasts with the cloistered digital experience of a learning management system environment. The OERU approach of learning on the internet has more moving parts, but that added complexity also offers advantages. It is less constrained, as we've already said, than via a learning management system. It enables collaborative content creation with detailed version control, not limited to participants from a single institution. It means learners can keep control of their own work, both during and after studying. In an LMS environment, learners are often unable to retrieve their learning objects or artifacts once they've finished a course. And if they are able to retrieve them, they're often unusable. OER materials can be shared among institutions regardless of which LMS, if any, they have adopted. And learners actively employ and experience the technologies, conventions and practices of the real digital world rather than a model or artificial environment. By the same token, they experience that tools change and they develop the ability to adapt, which is the basis for resilience. This approach has several advantages for learners. They're able to navigate their own way through their learning journey. They build self-directed skills. They can save money, as we've heard already today, that would otherwise be spent on textbooks. They can use a variety of dynamic OER materials, potentially in different languages. They can access materials through mobile learning, and the approach enables lifelong learning. In addition, learners have control over their own data, both during and after study, and they never have to waive their rights just to use technology. The use of OER also provides opportunities for teaching staff and learning designers. So the European Framework for the Digital Competence of Educators identifies one key competence for all educators as the ability to effectively identify resources that best fit their learning objectives, learner group and teaching style, and the ability to modify, add on to, and develop their own digital resources to support their teaching. There are opportunities to build digital literacy skills, including wiki editing and writing for the web, using FOSS tools, so free and open source software, which we'll hear more about shortly, and finding openly licensed content. Another aspect of this is understanding open licenses and the use of OER. There are also opportunities for collaboration, curriculum innovation and student-led content development, as we also heard earlier this morning. We, in the OERU network, we collaborate on content writing, assessment writing and moderation, and idea generation to ensure a meaningful experience for our learners. In practical terms, this means that educators or developers in New Zealand, for instance, may draft course content or an assessment which is then shared with network colleagues in Africa, Canada, Scotland, the States, wherever they may be, for feedback. As well as strengthening connections between collaborators and the OERU network in general, this also builds capability across the OERU community and ensures robust moderation processes. amongst experienced staff working in different contexts. In this way, we, the people, are also part of the learning ecosystem. Transnational collaboration enables us to consider intercultural dimensions of the learning experience and to integrate internationally relevant issues into our content. In this way, we contribute to 2 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 4, Quality Education, and Goal 17, Partnerships for the Goals. And with Dr. Wayne McIntosh, UNESCO and ICD Chair in Open Education Resource, based here at Otago Polytechnic, we fully embrace the mission to connect people through the sharing of ideas and collaborative capability development. So I will hand over now to Dave, who will tell you more about the technology.
Claire, kia ora all. We're a global organization as far as the reach that we hope to have. So we have infrastructure around the planet designed to be near to the people to whom it matters the most, and we put things in places that are designed to maximize the accessibility that people can have around the world to our materials. And we use a whole host of open source tools to allow learners to interact with each other. We provide these tools as a way of allowing educators to develop interesting assignments and materials within their courses, and this is a very broad palette, a rich palette that they can use. This is what we refer to as a technology wheel, and this is just a selection of some of the tools that we make use of. You may not recognize some of these, you may recognize some of them, but the idea is that learning online can be a disjointed experience for some learners because they're not in a traditional learning environment. So what we've done is we've actually worked out how to pull together interactions that learners might have in all sorts of different contexts, all around the web, not just within one institution's learning management system or any one set of technologies or any institutional boundaries for that matter. And we've actually created a system called WeNotes, which essentially allows learners all around the world from any country that they might be in to watch what their fellow learners are doing and remarks that they're making about things, resources that they're finding online, and they can be commenting in any one of these technologies. Any single one of these technologies, if they make a comment on those or they write a blog post related to their work, because many of the assignments involve writing a blog post, or they use Hypothesis, for example, to annotate a web page or a web resource that they found useful, then all of the other learners have the opportunity to find out about it through the WeNotes feed that's part of every one of our courses. So we're currently in the stage where we've actually had about a year now, a little bit more than a year of actually having live courses. In our first year from up until May 2019, we had 2,000 registered users from 113 countries. So not a lot of users. We didn't aim to have a big splash, a big bang. We wanted to sort of ramp up slowly so that we didn't succumb to our own success. Wanted to test our systems, make sure that they would all work. But as of now, we've had over 6,000 unique registered learners. And one thing that's unique about our system is that there is no need for a learner to register. They can be doing our courses entirely anonymously if they so choose, which has some interesting benefits for people, for example, who don't like to be under the spotlight of, they don't necessarily want people to know that they're studying, or they don't want to have the pressure to succeed, for example, if people know that they're undertaking learning. So we found it, and our Australian partners have found that first and family, this is a very compelling thing for people who are first and family learners, that they don't have to let anybody know that they're dipping their toe in the water of higher education, and it gives them a chance without any fear of failure. And in fact, we've now had more than 20,000 learners participate in our courses anonymously. So the only time you need to be registered in our courses is to participate socially. So you have to, we don't allow people to make anonymous comments on things, for example, to avoid spam issues and to also avoid some risks of misuse and so on. But they can do all of the learning without, and access all of the learning materials without any form of login at all. One of the great things about the component model that we've adopted is that we know that all the tools that we're using have already been used at huge internet scales, like millions of users. So we know that they will all scale to the maximum kind of likely scale that our services might offer or might ever have as a demand. So the fact that we've had approaching 30,000 learners now using our solutions, we could handle 10 or 100 times or maybe even 1,000 times more than that. And the mechanisms for scaling are tried and tested. And so scaling up, we know exactly how to do all that if we need to. So this gives you an idea of the kind of brands of the open source software that we're making use of. So we use every one of those things that you're seeing there now in our component-based model. It's a very rich group of technologies. And the funny thing is, most of you will be familiar with the proprietary alternatives to these technologies, mostly because they're heavily marketed. These tend not to be marketed because they don't have any of your money. Think about that for a minute. Whatever's marketed to you, you almost certainly know that you don't need it. And you definitely know that there will be something lower cost and better that's not being marketed to you because there's no marketing budget as a component of the cost of it. So we can say with confidence that these tools are second to none. Okay, so we believe that in a digital ecosystem, just like with a natural ecosystem, diversity is strength. And most learning management systems, all proprietary software, are monocultures. They're artificial and they're very vulnerable to failure. Not only are they vulnerable to failure in the form of the actual software itself, but they're also vulnerable to the suppliers changing their tack, or there's all sorts of different examples of that being a problem. So you have resilience from, you don't have problems with suppliers because it's open source software. No one owns these things. So one of the things that makes it really compelling for us is that we are technology self-sufficient. We don't depend on any third party to allow us to do what we're doing. We're participating in communities. We have essentially a stake and ownership in all of the tools that we're using. A lot of the heavy lifting is done by other people, but we're all doing it for mutual self-interest. And it's sort of just, it resonates and it allows us to achieve far more as a small organization than we could ever achieve if we went on our own, did it all on our own. But as Claire alluded, the diversity can create complexity. One of the ways that we manage complexity is we use tools like Docker. I won't go into details here because I'm running out of time, but it allows us to manage the complexity of lots of different services running on relatively humble infrastructure, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. But these are some of the websites that we currently use that comprise parts of our digital learning environment. These are some of the open source technologies for which we've written recipes for using this Docker system, and which we make available to any other institution to make use of if it allows them to offer new services to their learners. We actually write a blog that tells all about this. I'll provide the address for that in a little while. This is the most important slide, I think. Our fixed IT cost for the entire OERU, currently supporting about 30,000 or nearly 30,000 users, or learners rather, but potentially supporting as many as 100,000 learners, is less than $4,000 US per year. So that's enough to make most CIOs and IT directors' eyes water. And our variable cost per learner is zero, because not a single one of the technologies that we use has a per user cost. And the cost to our learner is also zero. In fact, the sum total of proprietary licenses that our entire organization pays per year is $180, and that's for Zoom. And we're just about to replace that with an open source alternative called Big Blue Button. So we maximize our return on investment by the fact that when sometimes these disparate technologies don't, out of the box, work that well together, we invest our limited development budget in strategic software development that helps to provide a smooth glue between these different systems. And we can also benefit from the fact that there's a huge group of us, not just the 4 people in our organization that are having to maintain all of this massive myriad of tools. So I'll just rush through a few things here. How many of you have heard of MailChimp? So how many of you just had your prices jacked up for MailChimp, or if you are using it? Because apparently they've just recently substantially increased their prices. We're using an open source tool called Mautic, which does a very similar thing, although to be fair, Mautic does a lot more than MailChimp. But interestingly, when we first started using it, we were paying $50 per month for it. It's an open source package, but it was a hosted service provided by the Mautic company. That was a venture capital funded startup. But they decided to license their software as open source. We were using it in the early days, well, it was actually before this that we were using it, but it was costing us $50 a month, and we had about 1,000 people on our list of recipients. And they sent us an email suddenly saying, we've just decided to change our business model. Presumably their VCs had come and told them they needed to ramp things up a bit. It's going to cost you $500 per month, starting next month. And also, if you increase, we had aspirations to go up to hundreds of thousands of people on our lists. That was going to end up costing us thousands of dollars per month. When you look at our entire IT budget, that's a lot of money. It turned out, though, because it was open source, I spent an afternoon seeing if we could get Mautic running on our own infrastructure. Turns out we could. And this is the increase in our sending out of emails per day. So this is per day, the number of emails that we're sending out. And our entire budget for all of this, including my time for maintaining it, is about $80 a month. If we were using the service being offered as a software as a service, we would be spending substantially more than our entire IT budget combined. So almost as much in a month as we would spend currently in a year for our current IT budget. Okay, so anyway, the conclusion here is that we think that this has actually got a lot to offer. We think that all of our partners and all of the organizations represented here today could benefit from this, adopting these tools. They'll vastly increase the ability for institutions to work with their learners and to meet the learners where they want to be. And it does so incredibly cost effectively and with great ability to adapt. Thank you very much. And you can find out about our, this talk here is available at that URL. And then this is our source code. And this is the blog that we maintain that explains how to use these things. So that's like the instructions to how to use that stuff.
I just wanted to ask you, how do you overcome, from the learner's point of view, that there's a kind of comfortableness knowing that you're going to upload something to YouTube, you're going to go to Google, you're going to go to Dropbox, all those kind of things. How do you get over the kind of learner side of it?
Well, interestingly, it's actually not that easy to upload those things to Google to start with, but a lot of the learners that we're dealing with haven't had exposure to that sort of stuff. So learning our tools is more difficult than learning any of those other tools, and if they haven't experienced those previously, there's nothing to unlearn. The reality is that we assume that those things that are brand names are easy. The reality is they're no easier, or in many cases they're not even as easy. So we don't think that it's a big problem, and the adaptability that it kind of enforces on our learners, I think, is only improves their learning outcomes rather than causing them trouble. Any other questions? Yes?
So then I want the opposite question, which is how do you help your teachers or facilitators, the people who design it, get their heads around such a diverse...
I'm glad you asked.
With difficulty.
There is difficulty for sure, because teachers, educators seem to be more set in their ways. They will have had many more years invested in the closed technologies that we currently mostly use. But we offer courses in how to do that using our open technologies. So it gives them the opportunity to not only learn about them, but use them as they do.
I can maybe say something about that as well. So when I first arrived at Otago Poly, I did designing designing skills
Digital skills for
OER development. And it was a steep learning curve. Occasionally I thought, how have I not heard about any of these things? But persisted. And even since I've been seconded to the OERU for 5 of my full-time role, learning all the time, but both Wayne and Dave are incredibly supportive, and I see that support going out to other teachers as well. And I think if you're, no pun intended, open-minded to changing, then, why not?
People love to talk about how they found a bargain. Well, this is the biggest bargain you'll ever find.
I read this, and of course, I'm a very big Luddite about all this sort of stuff. It wasn't actually the technology which is clever, it's just the sheer volume of it. When you're, I think that in my experience, we're just not used to having to use technology and have technology with you at all the time. So I think our move is because of that they're in a better position than us. I just find it irritating because, log in here, do another password, log in here, do another password. Each platform you have to keep on doing stuff, which I saw as a hurdle, and I'm confident younger people don't, and it was that side of it, not the actual technology. Once you got into the technology, it was actually quite easy and straightforward. It was getting into it. I found that just incredibly irritating.
We have solutions for a lot of those as well, which we can, which are things that you would learn in some of the courses that we're offering. So like password managers, although we are also working on single sign-on systems that will integrate all these things, but that's a hard problem to solve. So we're very open here.
I just found it interesting that you said about how much they market these massive things. And I think of things I signed up for and they've gone like, hey, this would be really good for you. And I thought, yeah, let's do it. And you don't realise that that's actually marketing, isn't it? It's not, this is useful for you, it's let's get it up.
The problem is marketing works because we let it work.
Yeah, because we let it work. How many of our learners must do it? Because we do it in our course. We say, create a YouTube account and upload your videos to it.
Sacrifice all your freedoms.
And some of them don't even have a YouTube account. They go, how do you make one? And we go, just make a YouTube account. And we're almost buying into that system, aren't we?
And do you know what's happening with your videos or your data?
We're not far away from offering a video sharing service as well that will be also open, and there are a variety of, basically every tool that you're currently using that's proprietary, there is a very good open alternative to it right now. You'd be amazed. So a lot of people see what we're doing as really hard, but this is what we do, and we don't find it hard at all. And the beauty of it is our knowledge scales.
Just important, many of the learners we're trying to help are the poorest of the poor, who can't afford proprietary software licenses, or even worse, force them to break copyright law. So for us, it's also important that all learners are not forced in any way to give up or sacrifice any of their own freedoms.
Yeah, we're very principle driven, I think it's fair to say. So the good thing is that if you don't compromise on these things, then it's amazing the solutions that pop out of the woodwork. It's just a matter of looking around. Any more questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to say I love the idea that the owner of the academic staff is the learners. That they are maintaining their own intellectual property on that, rather than then, as often happens, someone else in academia thinking, oh, that's a really good idea, I'll go and do my da-da-da, and then publishing stuff that the student has created.
That's right. I mean, that's one of the things that the technology wheel that we showed towards the start. You can have your own blog, and you can register your blog URL with our service. If you do have to register for that. But if you register your blog URL and you post a blog that uses any of our course codes in the tags for the blog posts, they will automatically be harvested for that course, and so the people participating in the course will see your post. So you can maintain that blog for as long as you want. It's yours. But you can still use that as a way of interacting with your peers.
Okay. I'd like to thank Dave and Claire very much for a really interesting presentation. Thank you. So that brings us to our lunch break, everybody. Lunch is happening 2 doors over, and it looks like the next door is on the point of finishing up as well. So I think we can safely almost enter that door. Exactly.
It's crazy that found this in my life. It's very simple. So I go through the country with security services. I put it in there before I forgot I was there. I just knew that I was weirdly mulched. And the reality is,
yeah, exactly. So that's, exactly.
There's no effectiveness at all. I was able to find that these contested 90% 5%